Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Chris Jennings.
Today I've got Great Lakes migration editor Jay Anglin back on the show. Jay, welcome back, man.
It's always good to be here, buddy.
Yeah, and I wanted to get Jay on the show. As far as Great Lakes, duck hunting and things are really winding down even in some of the southern areas of the region. But there's some really good potential for goose hunting, and Jay kind of has his ear to the ground there, and especially even in like northern Indiana. Jay, what's going on up there? We'll start in Indiana and then just kind of rotate around the region.
Well, our dark goose season, Canada's and Specs, is open and runs through the second week of February. Michigan's closed, but it opens back up, I believe, next week, and then runs through the same Sunday in February there as Indiana. But we've got a lot of dark geese around, in particular Canada's. Most of the Specs that we did have, there was, compared to what some places in the country are used to, it's a smidgen, but we had enough to make it interesting. They're gone. So it's all Canada's. Couple different, 2 or 3 different, subspecies, but there's a lot of them. I mean, there's huge concentrations of, any given place. I traveled quite a bit yesterday, and just about every area where I went, there was anywhere from 500 to 1,000, dark geese on any given roost. Our biggest issue right now, which is sort of like a broken record this season, it seems like, is the appropriate conditions. The weather just isn't cooperating most days. Clearly these birds are very well fed. Most of the time they graze. It's a rare occasion that they're really, really jumping into the corn stubble big time. We have almost no snow. And again, plenty of open roosts for them to be here for the long, the foreseeable future. But yeah, it's been really good. Get a nice mix of birds that are little birds, big birds. I was lucky enough to harvest a couple banded birds last week that were from Pewanak, Ontario, up on Hudson Bay. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But things are going great. I think guys that are out scouting or and planning accordingly are pretty much guaranteed some success right now as far as Canada goose hunting goes, for sure.
Yeah, and while you guys are holding, pretty big numbers of Canada geese there in the northern Indiana region. I mean, the same really goes for, northern Illinois, and even, southern Michigan still has quite a few. And I think, I believe they're still hunting up there in southern Michigan, are they not?
No, they don't open up until, I believe it's next Saturday, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it runs again until the second week in February. It overlaps Indiana's dates for a few weeks, which, for border jumpers like me that used to take advantage of that, they've kind of overlapped them. So it's not nearly as advantageous as it used to be. But, Illinois had and still has an incredible number of Canada geese in the Chicagoland area in particular. Northern Illinois is just stacked with Canadas. And I don't see any reason for them to be leaving anytime soon. But I am hearing reports in central Indiana, central Illinois, and even down south that some of these birds, after a few cold nights, and probably, if I had to guess, crowding on the roost, they just thought, what the heck, they fly 2 or 3 hours and find another spot to hang out. So, there's birds all over the place for sure, but we are really, in my opinion, at this latitude, we're kind of ground zero for Canada's right now, all the way into it's looking like, from the reports I'm reading, all the way into the Central Flyway.
Yeah. And I think, just some of my buddies that hunt there in central Indiana, they picked up some Canada geese right there around Christmas, maybe that week right between New Year's. And you guys were like extremely cold and picked up some snow right there in that week, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So everything lined up. Everything was, the pressure in Michigan and kind of the guys getting their last licks in on them. And they just kind of jumped right over us. Now, we were already holding a fair number of birds anyway, but we definitely lost a few briefly, but then we picked up a whole bunch more out of Michigan. So this is a very common scenario up here. I mean, these are birds that are likely not going to leave. If we get really, really bad Arctic conditions and just frigid cold for several days, and in particular snow cover that's say over 6 to 8 inches, we'll lose, half. But in my experience, as soon as it thaws, they come right back. So they don't go very far south. It's the same with the ducks right now, Chris. I mean, I when I was traveling around yesterday, I kind of hit some of my little honey holes to look and see what was going on. And there's a lot of mallards and blacks right now at this latitude. And these are the birds that winter here. I know it's a lot of guys hope they'll move on, but my whole life of being a waterfowl hunter for several decades, I mean, these birds just don't leave. Now there's no hunting pressure, which is really going to keep them here. But really any open ditch that has watercress adjacent to crops, rivers, of course, sometimes spring holes and lakes, but everywhere I looked, there was big fat mallards and a handful of black ducks. So we've really settled into our, winter pattern here for sure.
Yeah. I mean, with the mild conditions that you guys have had, that's certainly not surprising at all. I do want to note something, and I'm not sure if you saw it, and it was a video that someone shot up in like Harson's Island right off the river there. And they're like, look at all these ducks. And it was just amazing to see these clouds of ducks up there. We're talking, middle of January, and these birds are just en masse, like stacked up on the river, and they're not going anywhere. There's not, I say that they could, but it's just something for hunters to think about as you kind of talk about the overall, migration when these birds get somewhere, especially mid latitude. And I would consider a little more than mid latitude, a little further north there. Are you hearing anything from that area, where they're still holding tons of birds?
Yeah. So that video was shot literally like a couple blocks from a really good friend of mine's house. And, I've hunted that area extensively for a couple of decades, and it's not terribly unheard of to see those kinds of rafts of bluebills and canvasbacks and redheads at this stage if the lake remains open. Typically by now, St. Clair has quite a bit of ice. The St. Clair River and the Detroit River will start to get pack ice. And eventually when the shipping shuts down, the Great Lakes freighters and the Coast Guard stops keeping the channels open, you'll get ice to stabilize. So it's nothing to see several thousand cans and redheads in a hole in the middle of the river. But to see that many bluebills out on Anchor Bay and the river is pretty astounding. Again, it's not unprecedented, but it just really kind of drives home what we've been experiencing this season. And I think the guys down south really need to understand that, Lake Michigan's wide open, absolutely covered with bluebills. Lake St. Clair, pretty much wide open. Lake Erie, wide open. We're talking vast areas of air, where they have food and they have water. And the only thing that's going to drive them out really at this point is frigid conditions. And looking at the forecast, nothing is looking like that's going to happen.
As we kind of progress into these late Canada goose seasons and then into the snow goose seasons, and you obviously have had some success. Like you said, you shot some birds last week, had a real good hunt. What are some of the tactics that you're using for some of these late season geese? Are you changing anything up, or is it very similar to what you were doing 2 weeks ago?
Well, there's two theories I'm noticing around here. You have a whole generation, or, just a whole group of guys that want to hunt with A-frame style blinds, with, silhouettes. And, they're running huge spreads, 10, 15, 20 dozen silhouettes. They're light. They're easy to put out. The vertical tilling that these farmers are utilizing now really leaves no stubble, no crop stubble, nothing really to hide in. So finding a field edge, a grass patch, a drain tile head, anything that differentiates the pattern of just a wide open, sort of homogeneous looking field. When you have an edge where two different crops meet, or even two different types of cut meets, anything that can change that helps immensely. I had a very successful hunt with another group of guys, over in north central Indiana last week. And we hunted out of A-frames. We had, I think, 3 tied together, in the snow, everything hot X field. And we got our birds, I think there was 8 of us, and we shot our limits, and, it was great, but the birds weren't finishing the way I sort of really, all of us want them to. They would come in, and they weren't flaring hard, but they weren't finishing really well. So what I'm doing, a combination. If I can find any snow in a field, I'll wear a Tyvek suit, get rid of the blind altogether, and just lay flat.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of old school, but it really works well. In particular, if you don't have like 6 guys, I'm talking with my son and I, or maybe 3 people. The other thing I'm doing is I'm using a real, just regular layout blind. And then typically what I do is, even in fields with no cover, is I'm putting silhouettes around the outside of the blind. And then I'm running really a combination of either full bodies and shells, sleeper rester shells, or if I have a little bit of precipitation, I will run maybe 100 or 150 silhouettes in combination with those full bodies to fatten it up. But these birds are some of the toughest Canadas I've ever hunted. They're absolutely acting more like snow geese every year. They go around behind us. They do crazy stuff. The main roost I'm hunting right now, they've been in 10 different fields in 5 days. That's insane.
Yeah, so they're definitely not patterning well, or actually not patterning to be convenient to hunt, I guess I should say. What about specs? We kind of talked before we came online that you guys in northern Indiana really lost the majority of your white fronts with that last big cold front.
Yeah, they moved on, and I there's no science behind it that's to my knowledge, but when our sandhills left, and we were holding tens of thousands of them, and they left on the leading edge, and then during that cold spell, the specs disappeared with them. I think it's just because they prefer similar habitats and feeding, areas. But nonetheless, they all boogied, and that was that. I mean, I think one guy last week said he heard a couple, so there's a few holdouts. But those I think ended up in southern Indiana, western Kentucky, maybe southern Illinois, because you know how they are. I mean, it's not like they just fly 50 miles like Canada's.
Yeah.
they got to move.
Yeah. I actually heard specs over my house last night in Memphis, which is, pretty rare for this time of year. Usually they're coming and going October, November, and then out February, late January. Well, even first week of February, really. But last night I had them, and I think we had a pretty predominant south wind, and I think they just took the opportunity to ride it from somewhere out of Mississippi, and they just kept on going north. Are you hearing anything from Ohio? I know that kind of northern Ohio region, they hold a lot of Canadas, and they have some great opportunities there as well as far as late season. You hearing anything over there?
Yeah, it sounds like they have, as usual, big pockets of birds that they can pick on. Ohio's blessed with some nice big rivers and some big reservoirs, and of course Lake Erie in the north. But I would say those urban areas, like Dayton and Columbus, are probably holding a lot from I've heard that. And also it's usually the case this time of year. And the bottom line is I'm hearing, a lot of guys are seeing a lot of ducks in Ohio. And that again is the same as, the situation here. If the marshes in Lake Erie start to freeze, we pick up some of those birds, but really the hardiest mallards in this flyway tend to ride that freeze line, snow line. And we're probably right on the southern edge of it, actually. But we're seeing, everywhere we go. And I know guys in Ohio and in Illinois are seeing the same thing. There's lots of ducks. And I don't think many of those ducks really ever have to go too much further south. These are the wintering birds we see, but they're hanging out with the Canadas. They work together. I mean, well, at least the mallards work with the Canadas. They go out and push through snow and get down to crop stubble. But really, we just don't have any snow of any magnitude in most areas. And so the birds are just, they're good to go. They can stay here for the foreseeable future for sure.
Yeah, no, those are definitely words that, hunters in more southern climates, do not want to hear you say, is that we just don't have any snow, because it plays such a massive impact on pushing birds. And I know even those hunters there in central Indiana and central Illinois who would like to key in on some of those Canadas, man, it's tough to get those big birds to move, without any snow cover. They're about as hardy as it gets. And then, like you said, all it takes is one big reservoir. Next thing you know, they're just going to hang out. So, It is a little bit frustrating, but, we have the one kind of bonus is, especially that we're all looking at down here, is we've got the light goose conservation order coming up. Have you kind of heard any guys whispering or, heard of anybody saying, oh man, we're definitely holding some light geese right now? I know my buddies in central Indiana who, never used to see snows. They're actually holding some snows right now, which is really surprising. Not surprising for the last few years, but, surprising overall, but they're holding pretty good numbers of snows. Are you seeing any of them up there in your area or hearing from anybody?
I haven't seen a snow goose in quite a while up here. I know Indiana areas that have tended to hold snows the past few years are holding birds for sure. And that goes to some degree for Illinois as well. Those birds tend to hop that Wabash River back and forth. And, it doesn't take but one heavy south wind and boom, you've got birds. So that come from your backyard or wherever down there. But, I think the snow thing, it's kind of been like the Canadas. The guys I know that have been kind of paying attention, they're telling me they're very difficult to pattern. They're not feeding heavily, so they're content to just go pick grass and hang out. So they'll find a little reservoir or a pit somewhere that has a little grass growing and just go loaf all day. And then head back to some main roost somewhere. So, these colder temperatures are going to help, at night in particular, because they start to burn more calories. So they're wintering further north all the time, and it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, they're definitely designed and geared towards surviving and pushing further and further north as far as wintering goes is seems to be their key to success. And I know down here, I was talking to a guy yesterday about, the upcoming snow goose season. We're kind of planning for Arkansas. And, we're like, man, it could be like a few years ago where, 65 degrees in a south wind and they're blowing birds north. The last week of January, and our snow goose season in Arkansas was pretty much done by about February 10th. Or, they could be here, I've shot them over around Stuttgart, middle of March, the back end of the migration. So you never really know. It's all going to depend on the weather. And I think it's, that's not going to change anything, as far as our approach, obviously, but, it's always good to hear that those Great Lakes states are prepared and some guys are fired up about it for sure.
Well, one thing I will say is when it comes to these snows, the theory that the juvies go further south into Mississippi and southern Arkansas and whatnot, Texas, that just doesn't bear out anymore. I know for a fact, and I have very close contacts, in the southern Illinois, southern Indiana area who have told me that the juvie numbers are very high. And so that just tells you right there. I mean, if that's the northern terminus of snow goose wintering territory and you have juvies there, I mean, it's just, people need to remember, rules change and certainly, with our climate, the way it has been, with these warmer winters, you can just be right in them. I mean, the second the season opens, you can be right in the situation where you don't just have all adults. You have some juveniles to sort of screw things up for the adults. So, there's a lot more interest up here. And I think as guys get geared up and how gear intensive it is, they'll become better at it and then we'll have better intel coming out of those areas. So
cool. Yeah. Here in a couple of weeks, we'll probably, have to bring you back on just to give us a little update of, where that snow goose migration is, with luck for us, they're still holding down here. But, like I said, all it takes is a big south wind for us and it's game over. So, all right, Jay, man, I appreciate you joining me. And, hey, one quick update. How's the fishing up there?
It's been really good. I would call it even exceptional. We settle into this time of year and you just have to, when it comes to steelhead, Great Lakes steelhead fishing, you can catch one any given day in 34-degree water, but you better be fishing that 15, 20-minute period when they decide to do something. So yeah, it just takes a lot of time out there. But yeah, overall, it's been great.
Awesome. Well, that's good to hear. Even if the ducks were a little slow starting out for you, it sounds like the fishing worked out. Yeah, man, I appreciate you joining me, and we'll bring you on here in a couple weeks, and we'll talk some more light goose conservation order.
Hey, I really look forward to it. Great being on. Thanks.
I'd like to thank my guest, Jay Anglin, Ducks Unlimited's Waterfowl 360 Great Lakes Migration Editor, for joining us today and providing a little update on some late goose opportunities for Great Lakes region hunters. I'd like to thank our producer, Clay Baird, for doing a great job of getting the podcast put together and sent out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.